Hello. I'm a little late. There was a snow day on Wednesday and Thursday, which had the boys home, which had this place loud, chaotic, and completely disorganized. It made just getting the daily chores challenging, so the video had to wait till today while the kids were at school. I don't have a transcript. I will be typing up something related to this, and it'll be posted on the blog, which I will link to in the comments. I've really been struggling with imposter syndrome for the past month, a little bit longer to be honest. And I know that people say, imposter syndrome, what are you talking about? Imposter syndrome is when you have the skills, the credentials, the experience, all the little details that you need to succeed at something, and you don't believe you fit in. Imposter syndrome can happen at any time to anybody. And at one point in time, I read an anecdote of Neil Armstrong experiencing imposter syndrome. The man who walked on the moon felt like he didn't belong at this big gathering of scientists and other experts in the field and whatnot, because, in his words, I just went where they sent me. If the guy who walked on the moon can have imposter syndrome, anybody can. Working around imposter syndrome's really hard, especially when you're someone who has a lot of emotional trauma and emotional baggage that you're working through, like me. Gaslighting takes imposter syndrome and makes it 1,000 times worse. If you're in a situation where you're being gaslighted, gaslit, I'm not sure the correct way to conjugate that would be. Anyways, if you're in a situation where gaslighting is happening and you're experiencing imposter syndrome at the same time, everything is tumult. Gaslighting puts you in a position where you are questioning reality itself. Someone whom you are dependent on, or you have a high respect for, or are otherwise in a position where you have to adhere to their sense of authority, when they abuse that authority and they tell you what happened did not happen and feed you lies like that, you're struggling with whether or not you belong becomes 1,000 times worse. I say this from experience. If you're in a position where you're not being gaslighted, imposter syndrome is it's pretty awful. And crisis of confidence is a lot like a crisis of faith, because it's a crisis of faith in yourself. And in dealing with crisis of faith, the best thing to do is just keep trying. It's hard, it's painful, but eventually it gets better. Because your persistence, your determination will rebuild your confidence. Pardon me. You need to figure out how to separate the lies that you're being told, either by imposter syndrome or by people who are gaslighting you, or what my husband and I have taken to calling scumbag brain, and what's real. You got to separate those two things. When you're struggling with imposter syndrome, they're all conflated and mixed up. And it can be hard to disentangle that. If you're sitting there and you're looking at, for example, in my case, I've been looking at my writing and going, wow, it's not performing as well as I thought it should be. Maybe there's something wrong with what I'm doing. Instead of sitting there and looking at my process and looking at the mechanics of it all, I started questioning myself and questioning my abilities as a writer, which turned into my questioning my value. And it's painful. It's really painful and really hard to just push that aside. I've been in some form of therapy for pretty much all of my adult life, and I still don't have this figured out. There are experts in the field who still don't have this figured out because the solution is different for every single person. Because imposter syndrome manifests differently because it's a very individualized thing. There are skills you can use to help work through it. There are a lot of the same skills that I was taught to help me work through my problems as a result of my past traumas and the gaslighting I experienced. One of the things that I learned is journaling. Keeping a journal can help you out because you can write down the negative thoughts that are coming to you and later come back to them when you're feeling more stable, when you're feeling more confident in yourself. Even if it is just a little bit more confident, you can come back to it and then challenge those thoughts and say, where is this coming from? That can be pretty hefty lifting. In the immediate moment of I have an attack of imposter syndrome, I feel like I'm not good enough to post this video. I basically turn around and say, shush, scumbag brain. I'm doing something. You have to wait. And I treat it like an annoying, small, yappy dog pulling at my pants leg, and I basically say, stop. I'm doing something. Stop. It's not the best solution to just force yourself through it, but it can work for a temporary stopgap. It's not the ideal solution. I'm working on finding better solutions, but I haven't found one yet. The other thing that helps with imposter syndrome for me is having reminders that I am competent enough and that I am skilled enough. Like having a picture from my college graduation hanging up on the wall reminds me, yes, you have a college degree. You are a smart person. You have the credentials to be able to write about just about anything you put your mind to, as long as you do your research. And these reminders, sometimes I need to get them from outside sources. And I'll turn to my husband and I'll say, hey, honey, I need a little bit of reassurance here. Now, there's nothing wrong with asking someone for reassurance when you're having a really bad day with imposter syndrome. Because 9 times out of 10, they're going to tell you, no, you're not a fraud. Look at all this stuff you've done. And they'll start pointing out the pile of evidence that you have to say to the imposter syndrome, you're a liar. Because in the end, imposter syndrome is like depression. It's lying to you. The hard part is filtering out lies from truth. That's where evidence comes in. Evidence is like the journaling that I mentioned earlier. Writing down your experiences, making a list of what you've accomplished. That's all evidence. And if that's not enough evidence, look around your home. Look around your workplace. Talk to people that you know. They will provide you with examples of successes that you've had that they admire about you. And these things will help make imposter syndrome easier to deal with until, like anxiety, it goes away for a bit. Because it comes and goes in waves. But eventually those waves get smaller and smaller until they're more or less easy to handle. And you're just like, oh, it's just my imposter syndrome acting up. It's just like having hay fever. And that's basically what I've got for you today. Like, comment, subscribe, or don't. Either way, I hope you're having a good day. Stay warm if you're up here in New York State, because it's really cold. Have a good one.